This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
We finished the methods of looking at strategic position by considering the SWOT analysis, or Tau's matrix as it's sometimes called. Almost certainly you've come across SWOT analysis before. It stands for strengths and weaknesses. Those are internal, and opportunities and threats, which are external. So examples of strengths and weaknesses, it could be I might be very strong at marketing, but I may have a very bad or weak IT system. I might be strong in R&D, but I might be weak at marketing. Opportunities and threats, the external. The threat could be a change of government, a rise in interest rate, a change in exchange rate. An opportunity might be a competitor in dire financial straits who's maybe open to an offer for a takeover at a nice cheap price. The great thing about SWOT analysis is if you're asked to appraise the position of a company, it will always work. And sometimes examiners just say using a tool or tools of your choice, analyze the company's strategic position. SWOT will always work. So it is a fallback, and not to be by any means shunned, but I would say that the examiner does complain sometimes of being swatted to death, because it's the only thing anyone ever does. And certainly if the question, say, is using a tool or tools of your choice, I would take the hint and try and use more than one. So if you're doing a pastel analysis, this is the external macro environment, then of course pastel would actually feed some ideas into the opportunities and threats. If you're looking perhaps at the M words that we had for our resources, the money, the men and women, the machinery, the management, the marketing, the MIS, the make, the brand and so on, then they would tend to feed into strengths and weaknesses. We've got a very strong brand, but perhaps the management of the company is a little weak to make use of that. The great thing about setting it out in this particular matrix, strengths and weaknesses across the top, opportunities and threats down the side, is it should be provoking us to action. There is no point in doing a SWOT analysis, or indeed any other type of analysis, if all you do is kind of say, well, it's very interesting, kind of shrug your shoulders and ignore it. What you should be doing is taking information from this and kind of saying, and so what? What should I be doing? How should I protect myself? How should I make use of an opportunity? But that's what we need to be doing. That's the purpose of these analyses. So if we look at this one here, we have a strength and opportunity. Matching. So maybe our strength is lots of money in the bank. Maybe the opportunity is a competitor who is in hard times, maybe ripe for a takeover. That's a marriage made in heaven, really. We can use our money to take over that competitor. Another example, maybe there's an opportunity to open in a developing country, and our strength is we've got very good international marketing, a lot of experience in working abroad. Again, that's probably going to work. We have the internal strength, which is just right to make use of the opportunity. To go to the next one here, a weakness matched to an opportunity. This could be like seeing a competitor in a bad financial state. We'd like to take them over, but we have no money. And if we have no money, we can't do it. So what we have to do is either not do that strategy at all, not make use of that opportunity, or what we have to do is to make good the weakness, find the money, perhaps have a rights issue or try to borrow from the bank to allow us to take that company over. Another example, we're saying if you have an opportunity to open abroad, but you've got no international management experience, the managers are all from the family who've been kind of operating in a small way. If they try, with their lack of experience, opening abroad, they'll probably fall flat on their faces. What we need is a way round it, a way to repair the weakness, maybe by recruiting a skilled marketing manager, or maybe by entering into some sort of distribution or franchise agreement with a company which is already operating in a foreign country so they can help us. Sometimes we'll face a threat and maybe we have a strength with which we can fight it. It could be a threat of somebody coming into our market, a new entrant in our market. If we have lots of money in the bank, we could afford to reduce our prices, really put them under pressure so they don't make very good profits, and maybe we'll scare them away. Sometimes what people do, again a threat maybe of a new entrant coming into the market, they appeal to their brand, they appeal almost to a nationalist type of feeling. They say our product is a long-lived product made in this country, employing local people and so on. Buy from the home country, buy from a home company, rather than buying this foreign stuff which is only helping foreign employees, not your own. It mightn't be a very noble sentiment, but using brand strength and so on is frequently used. You can rely on a brand, maybe, or make certain pledges that people believe in. This is the tricky one. There is a threat, and it's aimed exactly where you're weak. This is what really caused the British car industry to die. British cars in the 1960s were not great. They were innovative in some ways. They had very good air conditioning, because after 6 months you could poke your finger through the metalwork, it had rusted so much. They had very low fuel consumption because they would never start. They were dreadful. Too many small companies making cars, none with enough resources to develop new models, and certainly none with the expertise to develop quality. And what they were faced with was threat basically from Japanese car manufacturers who came with the most superb quality. And there was simply no way that the British car industry could survive there. They tried to learn tricks from Honda and so on, but it was too little, too late. And essentially it drove them out of the market. Lots of cars are made in the UK now, but they're all Japanese cars. The only cars from a British heritage that might still be made are very specialist sport cars. No mass-produced own model cars made anymore in Britain, because there was a threat directed where they were weak and they couldn't survive. The syllabus makes several references to corporate objectives or organisational objectives, but doesn't quite ask or mention what is meant by organisational objectives. So I think it's worthwhile just making a little quick detour into what objectives are. We know we're dealing with strategic business leadership. We have dealt with, so far, basically gathering information. We've looked at PESTEL, we've looked at 5 forces, we've looked at resources. We basically know the position of the company. And knowing the position of the company, knowing what the stakeholders want and so on, then we can begin to think, where do we want the company to go? And essentially where we want the company to go is to do with objectives. We want the company to be successful, we want it to be profitable, we want it to be a good organisation and so on. But all of those are rather kind of amorphous terms. What's meant by success in the context of an organisation? And what objectives do are rather more definite areas where we want a company to end up. And objectives, to my mind, form the link between having gathered information, perhaps knowing the competition, knowing the resources, etc., knowing what might be possible, and developing a strategy. The strategy has to be one which is aimed at ending up somewhere. It has to be aimed at the corporate objectives. And the corporate objectives Being successful, for example, is a very high level, airy-fairy type objective. We can break that down into a number of much more concrete objectives. If you're successful as an organization, you will need certain sales, you will need certain costs, and that will give you certain profit, and that may be what you regard as being a successful overall destination for the organization. So objectives are much more definite, and in particular people talk about SMART objectives, and this can be brought into all sorts of places. It can be brought into managing people, give them SMART objectives. It can be brought into evaluating a takeover. Has it been successful or not? Well, think of the SMART objectives. First of all, it must be specific. We can't just say something has to be good or something has to be successful. It is what you mean by good. What do you mean by successful? If you mean by successful profit, then say profit. If you mean by successful number of countries in which you're making sales, then say that. It has to be specific, because if it's not specific, it can't be measured. And if it can't be measured, then the chances are it is going to be ignored, and you cannot make a judgment later whether you have achieved the objective or not. It has to be agreed or achievable. It has to be agreed amongst the people that you're giving this objective to, that it can be something which is achieved. If they do not think something is achievable, you can't persuade them to think something is achievable, they're probably going to ignore it, they'll give up. Why would they try to achieve something that you think is impossible? So it must offer them something which they think, if I try maybe a little bit harder, and I can stretch, I can get that. It's achievable. If they think it's impossible, why even try? It has to be relevant to what the company thinks is its corporate objectives. It has to be relevant to what a subsidiary regards as being relevant to it. Simply there's no point in setting sales objectives to the manufacturing department of a company when it has got nothing to do with sales. There is no point in setting quality objectives to the sales department. The sales department has got no say over, no ability to change the quality of products which are being produced. So it has to be relevant to the company, it has to be relevant to the people to whom you're giving the objectives, so they can feel they can have an influence on it. And finally, it has to be time limited. You want to make a certain profit by a certain date. If you just want to say, I want to make a profit, well, how much profit? Does it have to increase? By when? No good. You need to pin it down. Something which is specific, measurable, agreed, achievable. It has to be relevant to the company's overall success, or organization's overall success, to its mission, if you like, and has to be time limited. You just need to be a little bit cautious about some of these. You need to be consistent throughout the organization. If you want a profit of 5 million and you've got 2 subsidiaries, it would work if you said, you make 2, you make 3, the organization will make 5. It has to be horizontally consistent. So for example, if you say to sales, you're to sell 10 million items, there's maybe not much point in saying to production, you have to make only 6 million items. So it has to be consistent. It has to be consistent through time as well. No point in telling people your profits are to go 1 million, 10 million, 3 million, 6 million. Your gross profit is to be 17%, 12%, 3%, 20%. It makes no sense. There has to be a kind of logical pattern maybe to how you set the objectives over time. You need comprehensive objectives. The old saying, what you measure, you change. If your objectives are not comprehensive, it means people will concentrate on what you set as objectives and miss the rest. If you've set an objective over sales volume, then maybe the sales price and the quality will not be looked at properly. You need to be performing properly on usually a whole raft of performance measures. And finally, you need the long-term, short-term balance looked at. Any fool, this is a bit of an overstatement, any fool could make a profit increase next year because you simply reduce maintenance, reduce research and development, don't recruit anyone who's left. You can squeeze the costs for a year. But then 5 years down the road, when you've no new products, no good staff and so on, you're going to be in difficulty. And always, to some extent, because financial results are reported annually, the short-term results muscle in, and they will, if you're not very careful, they will knock out the longer-term, potentially more important objectives which you should be keeping an eye on.